Just gonna have a quick screenshot here. The good news is you're like, it doesn't look like exactly the same house. Oh, it's actually this thing. Yeah, you know she's gonna get up and she's gonna stretch around and stuff, so you might have to disappear. Where are you going? Disappear from your thing and reappear in here to bring the bed. Yeah, she would have shown no blames. Yeah.
Close the door.
Huh?
We'll have to close the door.
So we don't hear each other? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bye. So I'm just here, right? Okay.
Fuchs, do you hear me?
Now I do. I do. I can hear you in the audio, and I can hear you now in our.
Do you have headphones or?
I would prefer not to. I find them very annoying. But do you think I need them? Do you think I need them?
No, I think it's all right.
Sounds not convincing. And I'll just be sharing my screen, right?
Yeah, you can try that now.
1 second. What's this? I just have a little blammer in my ear. You conveniently left her in here with this. She's meowing.
She's doing the good yam yams.
Fucking gross. Quit a bunch of shit. All right. Hopefully my computer's not. Sometimes my computer's like notoriously shuts down when I'm doing like sharing too many things. So heads up.
Yeah, close all other applications like Slack and stuff.
So I'm doing.
And go to do not disturb mode.
Yep, gonna shut down my terminal as well. Right now my fan is like going a million.
Yeah, maybe restart Chrome.
But I'd have to close all my tabs.
I think they open again.
Okay, let's see. So presenter view and then share screen. See that little buck toy?
Yeah. Do you?
Did you want to?
Do you want to share it full screen so that it's only the slides without the Chrome and your bookmarks tabs and stuff like that?
This is data viz Zurich. Is it viz with an S?
No, it's with a Z. Viz.
In Zurich. You're saying you don't like all my
I'm just giving you pointers and tips. You don't have to take any of those.
that. Give me 1 second. Sweet. Okay, so slideshow, presenter view. And then, so on my screen, I just see the presenter view. And so when I share the screen, I'm sharing desktop to Google Chrome share. And you, yeah. I mean, I am full screen mode.
No, full screen mode would be if you hit Command Shift F.
Okay. Yeah, because I put it on full screen, and then when I share, it makes it back into a browser. Just FYI, in case someone is
so
like,
this just now looks much better than, you know, if you have Chrome alone. So if you start sharing, yeah, maybe you can just do Command Shift F. Because the process how you've done it now was, I think, pretty good. Like when we say, or when, you know, I'll hand over to you, and then you can say, all right, like you can start sharing the screen. Normally we start just the 2 videos. Yeah. And then I say, you know, I hand over to you for the presentation, and then I turn my video off. You can start sharing, and then I would recommend to share in that way.
Okay, sounds good. Why is you have so much, the light in your room is so much better than mine.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how my desk is rotated, right? Like you sit in front of the window.
Right. Too bad.
But your shine, like you have a shine because you're
so beautiful.
You're in the center and the dark backdrop. So
yeah. So other thing I was gonna say is, no, that's it. I think something real quick, but yeah. Anyway, BRB.
Yeah.
Which way?
You have a BA in journalism from University of South Carolina, right?
BA in journalism, MA, you know where.
Visual communication from Zurich University.
Yeah, and one thing is, like, I think it's not that big of a deal, but technically I'm a senior visual journalist, not a senior visual editor. Good. Which is this, like, I edit also, but FiveThirtyEight would never call me a senior visual editor. That's what the job they didn't want to hire me for.
Yeah. Somehow I have senior visual journalist. I don't know, did I write anywhere? Senior
Yeah,
visual?
I think it was on the Instagram.
Oh yeah, fuck that anyway.
I think it's fine. I think to people who are not in journalism, it's negligent. It's not really a difference, but I just wanted to, in case you say it out loud.
I do. All right.
Okay. I'm gonna get some water.
Mm-hmm.
Let me close this.
Yep, you're good. All right, you're right.
I think so.
All right, let's get started.
Is it just us?
Yes. It opens up now.
Okay. I was like, why would I give my presentation to you? I think we had a comment in the thing that asked if we were doing a recording, so I assume we are recording.
Yes, we are.
Great.
All right, welcome everybody who is already joining us in today's webinar. We'll give the attendees a couple more minutes to roll in before we get started with the official part of the meetup. So great to have you, to everybody who's already here. Let's use the couple of minutes that we have and share in the chat who's here, who's joining us, and from where. So down at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you see the chat icon. Switch to everybody in order to address everyone, and quickly let us know who you are, maybe where you sort of like joining us from today.
This is so fun. Look at all these people.
I know. And look, from all over the world.
No, Chip, my friend Chip is here. I used to work with Chip at my first startup outside of my bachelor's. So that's really fun. Hey, Chip. Also, we have some friends from Accurate, which is fun.
Hi, Luke in Berlin.
Oh, hey, Luke.
All right, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started.
Oh, hey, Golf from the Netherlands.
All right. Anna, you ready?
I think so. One thing I would say again, just quickly, if you're in the chat and if I need to see something in the chat, switch it to everyone, because I still see some people are sending chats to the host and panelists. Because maybe you are telling me to slow down, or maybe you have a question that I can answer. So make sure everyone sees it. You want me to share my screen? Should I do this?
No, have the proper introduction. All right. But let us start for real. There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's meetup, the Data Visualization Zurich meetup. Special hi to everybody who joins us for the first time. It's clearly not me, the reason for you joining, but it's our speaker today. Our speaker today is Anna Wiederkehr. Anna is a designer with a background in journalism, interface, and visualization design. Anna holds a BA in journalism from the University of South Carolina, United States, and an MA in visual communication from the Zurich University of the Arts. She currently is a senior visual journalist at FiveThirtyEight, and she has previously held the position of head of graphics at Neue Zürcher Zeitung. Today's meetup will be all about process. If you know Anna or if you follow her on Twitter, she is an avid sharer of process, work in progress, and sketches, as well as fuck-ups. So today we are going to hear from her about the importance of iteration in data visualization design, and how iteration, even though it might be hard and frustrating at times, leads to a better solution than probably the first idea that you had. So with this, I will step out of the way. Anna, I ask you to share the screen. I'll stop my video. And for everybody in the chat, I will be available to you in the chat if you have any questions or concerns, and let me know in the chat. And Anna, I hand over to you. The stage is yours. Right now, you are still on mute. So we probably want to switch that, and you can get started.
Looks good. Okay, I am going to pull up the chat just in case. Okay, everything is good. Benji, can you give me a thumbs up just so I know? Great, incredible. Hello. Thank you for the invite. Just want to get it started here with this very adorable waving Shiba. I am a share of process, but I'm also a fast talker. So if there is any need for me to slow down, my mother tongue is English, so sometimes I forget when speaking to audiences outside of North America that it can be a little hard when I get talking really fast. So I got enough drinks here to keep me distracted. So as Benji said, I am currently a senior visual journalist for 3 more weeks at FiveThirtyEight, and then on to something new afterwards. FiveThirtyEight is a data journalism website based out of the United States. and we cover politics and sports most heavily, also COVID. And we're most known for our general forecast, which is where we build a model during an election year in the United States to predict or generate the probabilities that a given candidate will win the presidency or a given party will win the House of Representatives or the Senate. Prior to that, I was a head of graphics at the Neue Zeitung, a Swiss newspaper of record in Switzerland, based out of Zurich, one of the bigger ones. And prior to that, I was an interaction designer, a data visualization designer, UX designer, digital designer, pretty much any hat in the realm of design. I've worn it. I've done it well and done it poorly. But that's essentially the through line of my career. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So as Benji mentioned, this is all about process. It's all about finding the right way to come up with a final solution, whether it's in a design or a user experience or a visualization design. And recently, since I've been trying to take a step back from my work and kind of generalize a little bit more about my process to understand what type of work I want to do, if there's a way to focus on the types of work that I love to do most, I would like to do that in my career going forward. And that's kind of how I ended up trying to develop a couple of little like shareable bites or talks about the value of sketching ideas, sharing those ideas, and then trashing them and starting over. So let's get into it, right? The first piece of that process when I start a project or when I approach a new problem space, I typically spend the first step just trying to understand. Typically, it's understanding the data, asking a lot of questions about the problem space, trying to figure out what I'm going to be working with and how I could approach it in the best way possible. And the most common way that I do that is by sketching something. Here's an example of what that looks like. Recently published a piece on kind of on Tom Brady, but it looks at the base level of the data is every touchdown in NFL history. And NFL is the American Football League. So American football, not the better football. But basically we had a data set. This is what it looks like in Google Sheets. It's every single touchdown that was ever completed, from a quarterback who throws the ball to a receiver who catches the ball, and then a number of other parameters that we could use in the visualization. It maybe sounds straightforward to you, but to me, I was like, how are we ever going to figure out what we want to visualize here? So we have, a bunch of quarterbacks and a bunch of receivers, and I wanted to understand how we can create a connectivity visualization with a single quarterback to see how far their touch points were across the NFL. And the same thing for receivers. So in order to get a handle on what that might look like, how I need my data to be structured, I had to try it. Starting out with Tom Brady, thinking about all the receivers that Tom Brady has ever thrown to, thinking about all of the quarterbacks who have ever thrown to receivers who Tom Brady also threw to, and then thinking about all of the receivers who caught from the quarterbacks who threw to a receiver who also caught a pass from Tom Brady, right? Your mind is already spinning, so was mine. And this was sort of like my first entry into this data, trying to figure out, can we create degrees of separation between these players? I'll show how we ended up approaching that at the end of this talk. So drawing, redrawing, having drawing as an entry point into a problem space has always been a huge part of my process as a digital designer, as a data visualization designer, as an information designer. And so here are some sketches. You came here for the pictures, so here are some of both daily turnaround projects and also longer form stories. Maybe they start with something like a printed idea. So that one on the left here is actually like a printed simple Python script that one of my colleagues produced, looking at how many days were above the heat record in different parts of Switzerland. And thinking like, okay, can we turn this into something really quick to say something about climate change in Switzerland? So it started with something printed, we draw on top of it, we reimagine it, and then work it for both a digital and a print format in that case. The middle screenshot is just a very simple sketch, came from an argument of whether daylight savings time is even good or not, or should we do it? And my colleague Haluka wrote sort of a plaidoyer about daylight savings time, and we wanted to create some visualizations to show who's really affected by this change in time and is it good or bad for them. But it really can start at something very basic like this. And the one on the right is kind of a longer form piece about the gender pay gap and how that's changed in different European countries and countries in North America. And you can see I'm kind of just like, I'm literally writing by hand what we're going to write in the text to get an understanding of how that story flow is going to work on a mobile phone in this case. So sketching an idea, talking through it with my colleagues and starting it again. It's pretty bread and butter. And so who said you really need like full pieces of paper to actually do this, right? On the left-hand side, you can see a bunch of sticky notes just and the same train of thought, thinking about how we're going to show the green wave across the Swiss government. This, I don't remember exactly what year this was, a couple of years ago when I was working at the Institut. But there can be a lot of different starting points. And my process tends to follow the same pattern again. So sketch it by hand, talk through it, grab another sticky note, generate something digitally, come back again, draw on top of it, talk through it. On the right-hand side, you can see kind of the before and after of that. On the top right, we're looking at, with a colleague of mine, Mary Jose, looking at weapon exports from Switzerland into countries that are currently in conflict. And so it started as just a bar chart. Maybe the exports look like this, just drawing those, thinking about how we're going to maybe show where the conflict periods start, and then actually using the real data to generate what those charts are going to look like, going back on there, making sure we have the conflict dates correctly, making sure we're applying pieces of orientation, annotation, in order to make sure that the reader is really going to be guided properly through each of those charts. And over time, I've gotten actually, don't want to humble brag, but I've gotten better at just starting within the screen, as we all have, right? Everyone's probably been remote for a while. So thinking within the computer has started to be second nature for a lot of us. And sometimes I'm like, I already know what I want to do. Straight into Sketch, straight into Figma, straight into code. But I do find that the best ideas, or at least the best breadth of ideas, the best spectrum of them, come when I'm thinking with my hands. And that's, I guess, how I kind of think of it is it's the difference between when you like visualize that you can like land a skateboarding trick, or for divers, maybe land a dive or a ski run or something like that, whatever your sport of choice is. And there's a difference between thinking through each of the things and then actually doing it, seeing the relationship between you and the board or you and the water, whatever the case is. And visualization and design is similar to me in that aspect. You can imagine, hey, this project is going to look exactly like this. What a great concept. We're going to take this piece of data or this data set and make it into a beautiful narrative. Our data is, of course, always perfect, and it's going to work exactly how we have thought about it in the concept. But actually, if you sit down, start working the concept by hand, start drawing each of those individual metrics by hand, you're going to see the caveats, the missing pieces, all the footnotes that you're going to have to create. And those are the things that I find I miss, or I sort of like blow through and not consider if I jump straight into a design tool and design the best given situation, or jump straight into code and start writing a bunch of codes and then being like, oh shoot, the data structure is wrong, or I need to go back and collect this, or we have to pull an entire metric out because it doesn't make sense. And so that piece kind of fails you if you're going for that agile approach. If you're on a deadline, you're like, cut to the chase. I'm experienced. I know what I'm doing. Sometimes that still gets me. So it's a good reminder to start slow. So all of these, like the sketching process at the beginning, understanding my problem space, this is really vital for me to know what I'm working with. But I found also that seeing these sketches for other people is also really helped them understand the work that I do. It helps me practice communicating what I'm working with. And that kind of like leads me to that second piece, right? Sharing the sketches that I've been working on, or sharing my understanding process. And as it turns out, sharing that has served me also as a method to like build synergy across expertises, work across departments, helps my client and my stakeholders who might not be from the same type of work that I do, really understand how I've gotten to the pitch or how I've gotten to the final proposal that I've started working. Some of you have seen this if you've worked with me before at the NCSED, and also at Interactive Things. We had these really giant boards that were taller than the average person, standing all around our department, all around our little area. And we used them to flesh out a flow for how a piece was going to be visually told online. And you can see kind of like, this is a project that I worked on about wildfires in Switzerland, where we have this like printed out version of all of the text we're going to put in here, all of these like lorem ipsum paragraphs, and then sticky notes like, this will be this, like this, the global perspective. This will be the perspective about Switzerland. Here are some of the illustration ideas have, here's the data set, and kind of like layering a bunch of different ideas, a bunch of different sketches, a bunch of different outputs on top of each other. And these would sit in our department, and people, there's a glass left-hand side, you can see the glass door. People would walk by all the time because we were conveniently located next to the restroom and next to production. So people would go in and out of this glass door, and they really would see these boards and they would stop. Even the people who didn't love working with us, or we've had issues with in the past, which anyone who's worked in a newsroom understands, they would stop and they'd be like, huh, what is this? What are you guys working on here? Can you walk me through this? Oh, I also have an idea. I also have worked on a climate story. I was also wondering if I could have a chart in my piece, that kind of stuff. And so it really opened up a lot of opportunities for collaboration. And for us, it opened up a lot of ways for us to promote our work and get into more places to produce visual stories for the readers at the NCSED. And some of you, Graphic Hunters Conference here, will recognize some of these photos. Luckily, building on my experience with what I was doing at work, I thought, well, okay, everyone should do this. It's working out so well for me to share kind of my process work. It's working out for my team to share our process work with other people in the department, other people in the newsroom. So everyone should do this. Everyone should just get comfortable sharing unfinished ideas. And so luckily other people have let me sell them on that concept, and they've invited me to come do talks, come do presentations, conferences, talking to you guys right now. And some people like within FiveThirtyEight know this. I've also done little workshops there. And I've really had a lot of fun forcing people to draw data, talk about it with each other, explain it with each other, and then do it over again. It's really super fun to do it with non-visual people, people who think they're not visual, because you learn a lot more from watching them have a new experience communicating in this manner if they're more like written focused, for example. So in these environments, you see the two parts of that process start to merge a little bit, sketching and sharing, right? Because you're doing it together. And you've got people working through an idea outside of a screen, which I think is really important. And it really encourages this like sketch a thing, look at my neighbor, sketch a thing, ask my neighbor what they think, revamp, test, sketch, revamp, test, that kind of experience. And that sometimes can feel a little bit tedious in a digital environment, right? It's like open a new file, bring all my symbols in, spin up my new template. We think automating things can be a lot quicker, but sometimes it's not, or creates more of a mess than really just like new note card, sharpen this pencil, start over again. And so pen and paper might feel a bit archaic, but that forced slowness of drawing a chart or writing parts of the text that you're going to have in your story or in your project really makes you consider each aspect of it, and really makes you consider whether it should exist at all, which is really important. It's like a pre-layer of editing. You're like, oh, this is a really complicated piece of data that I'm trying to explain. Is it going to be too complicated? Is it bringing this whole concept down? Does my thesis come through right at the beginning? How long is it taking to get to a visual element in this piece? So it means in a lot of cases, the reduction of agility, the anti-agile, which I'm not promoting all the time, but I am saying sometimes it's valuable. So that forced slowness is going to be a solid base for a narrative, or like a really good design system, or a better user experience, instead of just jumping in, assuming that you've worked with some of this data before, or you, based on your experience, can already go into a more high resolution or finite proposal. So as I said before, when you do this kind of process, you've brought out your thinking process and your tinkering and all of these concepts that you're like, oh, maybe this, I scribbled this in the top of this piece of paper, or maybe if I change the color scheme here. You've brought all of that out into the open, and you've allowed other people to come discover your ideas, to challenge them, which it can be very difficult, but worth it, and to hash them out with other people. Hey, maybe you should try this. Oh, I never thought of that, right? And synergy, I know, is kind of like a dumb tech bro word, but I always feel like my ideas are infinitely better when I'm talking through them at a low resolution stage where everyone feels adequately skilled to be able to approach those sketches. So any designers in the crowd know if you have all these little elements, these details, everything is organized, things are pixel perfect, drop shadows, borders, all that stuff, even if in your mind, just v.1 or v1.0, to somebody else approaching to that, a stakeholder, a client, a colleague who's not a visual person, that looks finished. And if you approach with a sketch, they feel like, oh, I can give feedback on this. And I mean, maybe that's a strategy. So I can give feedback on this. Everything can be discussed. It's all on the table. And so on occasion, I will say, I have moved straight into digital mocking because of timeline, because I actually have worked with the data and I know this is just an iteration on that. But if I need to show somebody else who's not a visual person or who is my direct and needs to approve the direction, I might scale back, shut my screen down and redraw what I've drawn as a digital mock, but draw it on paper to, again, lower that barrier for people to give feedback on something and feel like they can start with anything. And that way you can get some of the bigger pieces of feedback out of the way before you start building something. So of course, practically speaking, all of this sketching, starting over sharing, starting over again sketching, the goal is to find a design. Maybe it's the right design, it's the best design, it's the adequate design, it's the design that fits within the timeline and deadline constraints that you have. But it can apply to anything, right? Whether that's a visualization, whether it's experience design, it's the architecture of something, it's the formulation of a narrative. Sometimes you get it right from the start, right? Hopefully everybody has had that experience where they've just been like, concept, design, ship it. It's worked out perfectly. That has happened to me, not as often as it hasn't, but I wanted to show a couple of examples of projects where it did work out. This is one of them. So we recently did a medal tracker, like everyone else, for the Olympics, one for Tokyo, and then we ended up reusing the same structure for the Beijing Olympics. Left-hand side, you can see this was my hand-drawn mock, where I went at it from a mobile first perspective. It was kind of like an effort to get more editors to think about mobile. But you can see I have, the little header bar, headline, we call it deck, the subhead, and then the biggest chart, which is we call the hero chart in a lot of our projects. You can see that the bump chart that I drew when I proposed this walkthrough looks a lot like what's on the right, which is what we finally published. So that is an example where I thought, cool, we want to show where the leaders stand, the top 5 countries, where we expect them to be over time, where they ended up being, and where we project them as a final rank. And that ended up being almost identical to what we ended up publishing. If you scroll down on the page, you can see on the left-hand side, I thought, okay, look, let's show each individual country has a card. And we want to show, again, a couple of these metrics, like where their current medal stand is, where the expected number of medals is, and where we project them to be based on their change over time. And so this is basically a glorified table. On the left-hand side, I was thinking of it more like a range plot or like a sort of like a dot plot to show positioning. And on the right-hand side is what we ended up implementing. Still the same structure, still country cards, still mini visualizations within them, and still a glorified table that you could filter based on how you want to see the ordering. But you have to get little metal icons in there somewhere. It's a favorite of newsrooms during medal tracking season. So here's what the whole project looks like. Super simple, not the most dense, complex, interactive visualization project, but still one that went from proposal on the left-hand side, me, pen and paper, drawing out some ideas, thinking about whether any of it's going to be interactive. Right-hand side, what we ended up publishing, great art, and a nice, fun little light color scheme and style. Won't go super into detail, but this is probably my favorite project I've ever worked on at FiveThirtyEight. This is when last year when Major League Baseball decided to integrate the statistics from the Negro Leagues, which was a segregated league of baseball. The statistics from those players had never been integrated into the larger Major League Baseball statistical database, and they were deciding to do that for the first time last year. So we wanted to commemorate that by making an interactive project and help our readers, who are big sports heads, introduce themselves to these Negro League players, understand how those players match up to players that we know today that are in the Hall of Fame, and just really get a good sense of the statistics and where the lay of the land, essentially. This sketch on the left-hand side, you can see, it starts out with that bee swarm plot at the top, hero visualization, and then we move into actual baseball cards, because why not use that as a visual element, introduce pitchers, introduce batters. We introduced a similarity algorithm where you could pick a player and see what Negro League players are similar to that player. And then kind of a data dump section at the bottom. Go through all the baseball players that you want to, filter them by different type of statistics, whether they're pitchers or batters. Again, turns out the first pitch was something that my editors liked. They said, go for it. And we ended up implementing something quite similar to what was the original structure that was pitched. Of course, right, it doesn't always work like that. Almost never works like that. Never a sure hole in one, never a sure slam dunk. And if any of you, maybe this is too much of an American stereotype, but if any of you did sports in school, you're super used to somebody being like, another rep, another lap, I'm gonna do 10 more jumping jacks. Or if you work in a newsroom, your editors are like, I was thinking another tack at that, maybe not necessarily this formulation. Clients being like, maybe a different direction. I would love to see something else. So you know what that's like. But if you've signed on to using a process like this, it takes a lot of that anxiety and stress away when any of those stakeholders say, yeah, something else would be great. You've already come to the idea that the ideation through this type of process can get you to the best possible outcome. And so you're going to find yourself channeling your inner donkey here and say yeah, cool, fair, let's do it again. Another word for that process is iteration. Some of you might have been thinking about it. Use common in design spheres. Some of you who are not maybe necessarily designers might think, I know another word that starts with an I that sounds like this. And that's insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I would like to say it's close. You're real close. They can be similar. But iteration is kind of like doing the same thing over and over again, but you're able to explore a multitude of ideas, get a spectrum of different solutions, and then you're going to be able to express that data for the right user base, right audience, whatever industry you work in. And it's something that your editor is going to greenlight, something that your client's going to say, yeah, ship it. So again, big fan of iteration. And I do see there is a resemblance to insanity, but you can streamline that process to make sure you don't go too far in one direction. So yeah, let's show a couple of projects because iteration is my type of favorite work. Is my favorite type of work. And I would love to show you a few cases where I think it really paid off. Very laborious case, this one. Haluka, again, my colleague at the NSTSA, a data journalist, I worked on this project with him where we looked at where women were in different leadership positions in Swiss government agencies and what the salary discrepancies were between women and men in similar leadership roles. I bring this up because if you work in agencies, you might be used to this idea that you create multiple directions for a client, whether they want to develop a brand or a website, whatever the case may be. You might to choose directions simultaneously to get to what the client, understand what they really want or what the user base really wants to test. You don't have a lot of opportunities for that in journalism. It's usually deadline specific. You usually pretend you know your reader really well when you might not. But this was a case where we did have time, and I developed 4 different visualization directions with the same data. And I worked 4 different sets of charts for this entire narrative. So you can see we have like a strip plot, we have like a cluster B-swarm sort of thing. We have some area charts that are like showing diffs, and then we have this like weird bubble chart kind of thing. And we, with real data, made every single version of these charts through the whole narrative. Of course, we built out these boards that I showed you before that had every single walkthrough for all 4 of them. And I took my colleagues, David Bauer, Mary-José, and Haluka into a room and said, which of these is going to work? Let's walk through each section. And what we found is by sticky noting things, by literally drawing on top of digital sketches, we found the plot holes in certain things. We found where certain visualizations worked to communicate a main message much quicker than other ones. And we found ones that like just didn't work at all. Like, no, you're forcing this, Anna. And so it was a really fun collaborative way to see like a whole spectrum of how you could tell a story with different types of visualization. And you can see in this like sketch or this like screenshot on the right side, Haluka went through every single one of these clusters and counted to make sure that I had generated the numbers properly. So again, you might sketch an idea, you might print it out, and then you go on top of it again and do the manual labor that really ends up helping make sure that you are being precise in the work that you're doing. So here's kind of what we ended up with. We ended up scrapping 2 ideas and then merging 2 other ones together. We found the strip plots really worked for our hero visualization. And then we found these clusters were pretty effective in showing the different salary levels in different leadership positions. And they also worked really nicely for mobile, just like flip those boys and make them rain down the page. So we would have never picked 2 if we didn't have 4 to choose from. Again, so making sure you're creating a spectrum of different ideas and sharing those and allowing for there to be multiple options to the final direction. If anybody knows the FiveThirtyEight work I mentioned before, we do this general forecast. This is one of the biggest projects I've probably ever worked on. 2020 general forecast. Here's what I would say like our designed wireframes. We knew we wanted to work with different pieces of different graphics and different modules, we called them. So we wanted to have one histogram of all the different possibilities on how the country could vote for the candidate they wanted for presidency. We had some other ones to show different leanings of different states. We had other ones to show how we calculate polling averages. So these little bites, these little modules. And the question was, how do we want to get readers through each of these modules and navigate to what they wanted to see? We wanted to do it quickly, but we also wanted to do it in a way that was going to help people understand the context and not just take this bite, screenshot it, tweet it. That's what FiveThirtyEight thinks. This is who's going to win, but really create more context around that. So can we create a user experience that can do that? So we started here, these low res user experience wireframe, these wireframes, share these with the whole interactives team, and then we decided to pick a direction. But first, of course, I wanted to skin multiple ones of those to be a little bit more clear about how wild we could be with the design. If you've seen the final forecast, I'll show it later. It doesn't look anything like these, but we did go down this sort of like, what if this was a different world game? Like, what if you were a character in the forecast? If you could understand the model that we build to create, essentially like to predict. What if you walked through each of these data points and you experience it as you would experience a world, an exploratory world as a video game? I really wanted to do this. If anybody wants to hire me to do one of these, please let me know. But we started here, and of course, once our design became more refined, we had to think a little bit more closely about how we want to show that top line number. I have a couple Twitter threads on this, so I won't go too much into detail, but basically when people come to FiveThirtyEight during the general forecast season, they want to know one thing, which is who's going to win. I don't care all the different ways, but I want to know, is Trump winning or is he losing? Is Biden winning or is he losing? What we wanted to make sure we achieved this year is not only express that, but also express how probability works, and also express how it works when you're considering that the United States is in fact that. It is the United States, it is not one, right? So we have multiple states. that have multiple systems will get to a final vote. And based on how all these states vote together, that's who will be able to say leans one direct, whether the nation leans one direction or another. That's also a very simplified version of the model. But again, we wanted to create a complex visualization, simple enough for it to be a hero up top, give readers what they want quick and walk away, but also communicate, hey, there is more context to these two numbers that you're seeing. One really fun thing that came out of that is you can see the middle looks more like designed, which was because I designed it. But if you guys know, FiveThirtyEight was started by Nate Silver, who's the founder and editor-in-chief, and he felt like that design's not good enough. I'm gonna take this into PowerPoint. I'm gonna generate a couple of maps, and I'm gonna draw little lines over here and be like, I want these to also show real maps. And he sent this to me and was like, here, this. And I think, like, again, 5 years ago, I would have been like, no, I'm the designer. But now I'm like, cool. The editor-in-chief, not a visual person, was like, very close. I want maps. Can we have maps? Here's an expression of my idea, right? And so he made a low-res sketch in order to show me that, which is very close to what we ended up with, right? So I took that consideration. We built the thing on the right. Again, it's got that ball swarm chart. And then a hover shows you exactly an example of a map that would lead to that specific case, that scenario, in which Biden wins and which Trump wins. So the user can really understand, aha, this conglomeration of states will get me to something that looks like Trump wins, see all that red, but actually it's a Biden state. So you learn more about how we calculate our probabilities here. And then of course you can see on the left, we littered that thing with maps. And one of the carryovers that was really fun is FiveThirtyEight, who was kind of like based on that idea of like, if this was a game and you had somebody to lead you through it. And so Fivey goes through each of these visualization modules in the page and explains, hey, actually a histogram works like this. You might have thought this is a bar chart, but it's not. It shows you something different. Hey, don't forget, a polling average has a lot of things that go into it. Here, read more about that here. So we really used him as a guide and a better version of Microsoft's Clippy. People liked it. Lots of people thought, yay, this is super cute. I love reading this. And then like some other people didn't, right? But at some point you do have to stop sharing and actually implement something. So thanks, Lewis, but you know, we went with it anyway. I want to show two other politics projects really quick. This was one project with a couple of iterations, actually a lot of iterations, where we looked at different counties in the US and how they voted Democrat or Republican in the past 3 presidential elections. So how do they vote during the Obama election, how do they vote during the first Trump election, and then the Trump v. Biden election. So you can really start to see, are certain counties moving more and more Republican? Are they moving Democrat? And then when Trump ran, they moved Republican. So that kind of movement we want to see across counties and then see across states. And we wanted to look at if there were patterns between rural and urban counties. Here's what we ended up with. Lots of visualization iterations later, we ended up with this sort of like windsock thing, and then a secondary level of data where you could see if a county moved in a direction, but still, for example, moved Republican, but still elected, or still chose the Democratic candidate in that case. So we had a secondary level of data instead of just using that arrow plot of like, move this way, move this way, move this way. Lots and lots and lots of R scripting here to generate this for anyone who's curious about how I generated this. It's funny, all the politics projects start to look the same when you're working with just 2 parties, same 2 colors every time. This is actually a different project, but we're looking at how the leader changed as we went from ballot boxes being open on voting day and 72 hours later. So if anybody was following American media, there was a lot of brouhaha about certain states going in a Republican direction initially and then flipping blue, and the same on the other side. A lot of conspiracy theories about that, but it's actually quite simple when you kind of consider it, look at a chart with it. You can get a lot of early voting and mail-in ballots that are for a specific party. In a lot of cases, Democrats did that during COVID. And then you still get a lot of people coming to the ballot box. So you might get two different views of what that looks like. And so we looked at a bunch of different ways to do this. We looked at doing it with area charts, with line charts, et cetera. But we ended up going with this version where you really start to see that diff, and you start to get these little sections where you're seeing where we have a Republican lead and moving into a Democrat, and the same thing in Georgia in this case, starting with a Republican lead, still staying Republican, and then flipping Democrat at that last little moment. So again, using bunch of different iterations to find these little tiny use cases that we wanted to point to. No, I'm slow, I'm running out of time, so give me 2 more minutes. I wanted to, again, finish up this complete this circle by showing you those that touchdown data at the beginning, and how like the type of visualization that I wanted to go for, showing degrees of separation within the NFL. These were the initial sketches, 45 seconds, sketch, 45 seconds, sketch, 45 seconds sketch, just to get a good kind of like spitball set of ideas out onto paper. Then I moved into doing different narratives, again, similar to that piece that I showed you about different salary levels in leadership in Swiss government. Did 3 different directions. What if we drop the reader immediately into the data to explore their own? What if we do it piecemeal? We show them this is what the data is, just like I was learning what the data is. Can we do the same thing with the reader? Moved into final visualization, or final kind of digital mock. Started to be a little bit more pixel perfect, still had some open ends. Moved into implementation, which required, again, a secondary level of sketching. We learned a lot more about the data from actually working with it, which happens even when you have done already all of this. You think you've got it all, then your data starts to be like super weird. You start to find out, oh, are we simplifying this too much? And in this case, we were. We wanted to show more of that texture of how many receivers could create a mini constellation around the quarterbacks. So we ended up with this. Some of you might have seen it on the internet. Spaghetti monster is what people like to call it. It's, again, looking at the different degrees of separation from a single quarterback. And you can see how those degrees or those kind of galaxies can be quite long, and then they can be quite fragile at times with one receiver to another, or they can be really thick that have higher levels of connectivity across the NFL, depending on what quarterback you're starting with. Last thing I wanted to just share with you is the simple tools and methods that I used to do this process. All of them are free with the exception of one. So hopefully you already use some of these, but just wanted to share some of those with you. The ones I use for sketching, obviously pen and paper, right? A lot of us have worked remote for the last year and might continue to still work remote. So sometimes this is still just too slow, but sometimes just to get your ideas going, I find it really valuable. Maybe the scanning and like cutting around and sending is kind of an annoying process when you're moving into digital. But I think it is a good start, and it's a good way to like free your mind from the screen. I use 2 different types of browser-based sketching tools, XCaliDraw and TLDR-AW to draw. Both of these help me a lot in just getting my ideas already digitally, and then pushing that into a final mock, which is what I want to show here. I go into XCaliDraw, I draw a bunch of stuff, and I literally export that as an SVG, put it into Sketch. In this case, I'm using Sketch. You could also use Figma. And that way I can already start dressing it with my styles and colors and typography that we use at FiveThirtyEight or that we use at NCSET or whatever the case may be. So I'm giving a low resolution sketch to the stakeholder, but I'm also dressing it as if it was already on our site. So that kind of helps balance out that what's up for discussion and how this is going to really look on our site. Tools I use for sharing are the tools that whatever organization I'm working in, we use. FiveThirtyEight, we do everything in Google Docs, which is funny and sometimes really, really tedious. But as you can see here, I'm pulling out these sketches from XCaliDraw, I'm putting them into Google Docs, and I'm working with whoever I'm collaborating with. And that is so key for me as a visual journalist to help facilitate good collaboration, working in their tools. So taking my tools, modifying my experience, and working in their tools is super important. Again, some of you might use Notion, depending on who my stakeholder is, right? I might work with Amelia in Google Docs, and I might work with everybody else in Notion. So in this case, I've built a sort of a structure where I can put a single slide or a single export from Sketch, and then draw a bunch of, or like use a bunch of the text features to say, here's what's new, here's the user case. Now fill this with comments. Let's go back and forth in the comments. Let's use like that sort of as a versioning of how we feel about whether this mock really accomplishes what we're setting out to do with this specific user interaction or this specific page. So we're starting over. It's a really small thing. Some people don't do it. All I want to show is that when I'm working in, just like you do with GitHub with versioning, just like you might use Abstract or something else, Sketch has this really fun little thing where you can just create multiple pages. It's like having pages in a sketchbook. So you can just make sure that you start over every day. That's how you can know, like, all right, I had that thing yesterday that mock yesterday that I was thinking through. I'm gonna today specifically create a new page and start over again. Maybe you bring some stuff over from that last mock. Sounds super simple, sounds super dumb, but so many designers do not do this. And I think it's really helpful to track changes, but also to know, but also to make sure you're starting out with a clean slate, that you can come up with a different idea and that you're not stuck in what you already thought of before. So this is just an example of how broadly that can change within 2 different days. But sometimes I even do it when I'm just changing one module on the page, for example. So with that, I know I'm so over time, but sketching, sharing, and starting over has been super valuable for me, which is why I like to talk about it all the time. It's been a successful way for me to understand the problem space, like I said, during that sketching phase, and then also open myself up for opportunities to collaborate and opportunities for my ideas to be better because somebody else challenged them or somebody else had kind of a tweak to them that I wasn't seeing. And of course, makes it all the better to land on like the right design or the good design or the best design given the case. Love to answer questions. I already saw a few in the chat. And I'm also happy to share some of the links wherever appropriate. Benjamin, you can tell me that from the work that I showed in the talk. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. Take a breath. Thank you for your presentation. All good. We do have a whole bunch of questions. So that's why I'm saying take a breath so that we can go through some of those. To start with, I would group a few questions together, which I think you already gave a partial answer towards the end of your presentation. The questions are all about tools. So maybe you could quickly summarize which sort of like general tools you use, including sort of like the programming languages that you use to build the final products.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, the manual tools, it really is just like a gridded notebook and pens and paper. And I have a set of like Prisma color markers, and you can see there's whiteboard back here. Those are all like most of the manual stuff. And I force myself to do that as much as I can. Again, using the 2 browser-based tools that I mentioned. These are actually really great and low res and not complicated to learn. And then Sketch, I would say, FiveThirtyEight, we use a lot of Illustrator. I think it's a garbage tool for data. Well, hold up. I think it's a garbage tool for like the type of data visualization work I like to do given this process. Sketch and Figma are both tools that allow make it easier for you to version, make it easier for you to like build in things like symbols and templates that are easier to work with for online web-based type of visualization. Yeah, I won't go too much. I have a lot of feelings about different design tools. And then for programming languages, a question we get all the time, can answer that specifically for FiveThirtyEight. And my colleague Ryan is here, I saw. He can correct me if I'm wrong. But most of what we do, we write vanilla JavaScript. So that plus the D3, amazing D3 library to create most of our visualizations. Depending on what the other case, like the modeling stuff for the forecast, that's like Stata, but that's not stuff that like I don't write the model. So I can't speak to that really. The other type, I think a couple of us use Python, a couple of us use Pandas. I am a subscriber of R, have also started working in Observable. So those are some other ways that are quick to use for data analysis, for generating quick charts. Tons of thoughts on R and libraries and stuff. So if anyone has individual questions on that, feel free to DM me. I think that sort of covers it, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one question that Beat asks as a follow-up, because it's a whole tool belt of tools. How do you decide when to use which one? And his specific question is, when do you decide to use something that's maybe like more efficient and faster, but maybe leads to a more standard result versus going the more flexible route, creating something that's really custom, but might take more time to get there?
Like, when do I decide?
How, probably.
I'm probably going to over answer this question. I mean, I showed this one sketch of these weapon exports, that project that I worked on at NCZ with Mary Jose, about where it was just essentially bar charts. At the end of the day, 0 people are like super complex visualization. We layered a lot of stuff on that. Like, you had like mini little timelines on top of it. But in that case, we were really, honestly, I would probably say the general answer to this question is audience. Who is the audience going to be consuming your visualization or consuming your story? And you need to make sure that you're not, overburdening the audience trying to understand the visualization. And if you are, that there's value to it, right? Like the Brady project I showed with the NFL stuff, we had the space. We're FiveThirtyEight, people come to us for sports. We had the space to be like, let's get weird. People are not going to hate us for this like fun and playful project using essentially basic data of like all the touchdowns. In cases where we're looking at weapons exports from a country where we're in a news organization based out of that country and saying, hey, Switzerland sometimes exports weapons to countries in conflict, that's already like, that we're producing that at all is discussion to be had. And then approaching it from a very, very, very approachable perspective. Most people know how to read a bar chart. We are going to help them read that, and we are going to sort of like couch it with a bunch of other context within the story. So let's like scale up on the story end and scale down on the visual end, but really still have a very effective visualization. And in print, it's of course super, super giant and beautiful. And online, we tried to do the same. So I think it really depends on your audience, which again, by working these ideas slowly first, you can think a lot more about that instead of being like, how can I make this viz really awesome? Which is cool if you're someone who wants clicks on Twitter, but not actually appropriate when you're in an organization where you have to create good journalism, good solid base source journalism. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. 2 quick questions, hopefully simple. Where or who are some of your favorite inspiration sources for great visualizations?
This is so hard. I'm like dog-earing that to like make a thread on Twitter about that, because I can be, I don't want to like pick the ones that come quickly to mind, because those are always the ones that everyone knows. I do think in terms of sketching, I saw one of the like questions about other people who do this work, and not a lot of people share it, but recently there's a couple cartographers at the New York Times who share some sketches of maps. When they produce those, there is everyone ever at the South China Morgan Post who does a lot of like really, really beautiful, like low res stuff and shows a lot of their process work. I know I'm forgetting some certain things. This is a difficult question. I don't want to just like name the top names, to be honest, because I think there are a lot of people doing that type of work. Of course, people know Stephanie Posovic, Georgia Lupi, these people who do more hand-drawn stuff. Again, I think what I'm talking about is slightly different to that. It's how drawing can help you get to a good place, and not that drawing is the thing, right? Because it doesn't have to be the thing. Let me think on that, and like I'll post like a nice tweet thread about people who I think are doing really good work.
All right, I'll hold you accountable to that. Feel free to answer the next question in the same way. What is literature that's interesting to you, that's helpful to you in terms of data visualization?
Fair. I've been actually reading a lot more research-oriented things recently, particularly on mapping, and particularly on everyone's favorite topic of visualizing uncertainty. That was something that was huge during the 2020 election. It's also something that I've been like, researchers have been so generously reaching out to me and asking me about my thoughts on it. So it's something I've been a little bit more involved with recently. I mean, again, mapping is like such a thing that if I spend any time at all, I'm reading about visualization. It's usually about mapping stuff. Kenneth Fields has a new book out, so please feel free to read it. Yeah, I can also talk a little bit more about that online, I think, when I have like a good list in front of me. But I am also an internet consumer like everyone else. I don't necessarily, we're from the same household. We can speak to how we don't own a lot of books. And so I would say that we try not to collect too many of them.
Fair.
Sorry if that's a bad answer.
All right, all good. Let's go to Beat's question next. He mentions that you mentioned Haluka from the NZZ a couple of times, and he was curious about what their background is. Beat is studying economics and data science at the University of Zurich, and he would be curious to like what are requirements, required knowledge, required education, maybe for fulfilling one of these roles.
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to like a fireside chat from the Data Visualization Society recently about managers who were looking to hire visualization people, designers, visual journalists, etc. Like this whole like slew of us. What are we? And I thought one of the things was clever to note is that people who are starting now in school have data viz graduate programs and undergraduate programs possible to them. But when I was in school, I was in like journalism. I learned how to like use a camera and write a lead, right? So like that was totally different. I don't have a computer science background. I learned to code at FiveThirtyEight. To give you a reference for that. I mean, my colleague Ryan, who is brilliant, he did a program in data viz. So that's really awesome. And people have a springboard into just jumping in and being really talented in the work already. That's not true of everyone. Haluka, I will say, I think Haluka has more of a computer science background. He's a Python writer. Also went to school for journalism, but not visual journalism and not necessarily data journalism, but has computer skills. I've worked with brilliant people like Mary Jose, who is a linguist, did a PhD in language, and then is just so good at research and so talented using data analytics and writing in R to just work through databases and then writing about those things. So I think you can come from a number of different backgrounds. I am very anti that you have to be data viz schooled in any way to work in the industry. I think lots of people come about it from a product design. Lots of people come from computer science, political science, environmental science. We just hired a data editor who comes from like a really different background, sports analytics, for example. So I think it really depends. You just have to find a way to apply the skills that you know and the thematic that you know, and be able to like create something that people, like from a journalism perspective, create something that people want to read and that's going to teach the audience something. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Let's leave it with that. A question from the chat from Fernando. How do you recruit possible audience or members of the audience to share and get feedback? Is this usually done in person? Can it be done online? Any experience on that?
Yeah, I feel like Ryan would probably say this. I feel like I'm always complaining about this. I think one of the, let's say, luxury, but also like very unattractive qualities of news organizations is that that's not always people's first thought. Who are our readers? And is this going to satisfy why they come to our site to read things, right? At FiveThirtyEight, we have a luxury in the sense that we kind of know our readership, but also we covered essentially 2 tentpoles, sports and politics, American sports and American politics. So we're very narrow. We're also free to read. That's a different situation than the NZZ, who has to convince readers to pay for them. Financial Times, Washington Post, New York Times, all of these places are going to should be in the space to say, we care about customer support and reaching out to our audience, understanding whether they like our stories, what kind of stories they like, what they find difficult, do they subscribe to the print version and the online version, all those things. That requires, I think, an entire team. At NZZ, we definitely got more reader emails about the things people hated, which was still really informative. At FiveThirtyEight, we get both, actually get a lot more reader emails at FiveThirtyEight than I ever did at the NZZ. And then for some things, like, again, we're talking about a different readership. We're talking about like millions of people looking at the forecast or millions of people looking at our polling. And so you do get a lot more user engagement when you don't even ask for it. But I would say in general, news, which is what I can mostly speak from, has a really huge gap in understanding their audience, and then financing teams built around understanding their audience. That's something that I think product design does a lot better at, which I think sounds like a cop-out, but it's really something that I can speak to only because I worked mostly in newsrooms.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see if we can get to the last 2 questions. And before we wrap up the interview, Sarah asks if your approach of sketching changes between or from when you know little about the story, little about the data, to when you get a much better handle on the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely happened to me in that project I showed about the NFL touchdown stuff. I'm not a huge NFL fan, so it definitely took me a long time to get into what the data is that I was looking at, figure out what kind of metrics, and then I think only once we started writing code did I realize, like, aha, I skipped this whole thing. Like initially I was only thinking about, I'll just use this as an example, I was only thinking about quarterbacks, like not thinking about the whole connectivity between receivers and other quarterbacks, right? And just like visualizing them as a line. But really what's really interesting is some quarterbacks who have only been in the NFL for a little time have huge receiver groups because they've, for example, changed teams 3 times, which means they've thrown to a lot of more people than someone who's been in the NFL for the same time, but only has stayed on the same team, right? So you miss those little layering where I miss it because I'm not a huge NFL fan. Maybe that would have been something super obvious to somebody who loves the NFL. They would know every team that quarterback X has ever played on and would know that. So it's awesome to work across topics like that, but it does hinder me, or maybe make that process a lot slower if you're working in something that you're not an expert in. And sometimes you move into digital or move into code before you realize that. And so again, best case scenario, walk it back, go back to your like initial start. And if you can't walk it back, then you're going to do what we ended up doing, which is iterate in code or iterate in a digital form. Like you're going to stop the process and just start spinning within that little whatever step of the process you are in, instead of being like, oh, we started in code, shoot, now I have to move all the way back. There's one project that we'll publish on Monday, which is a case where we're looking at abortion in the US, where I stopped writing code and went back to iterating again by hand because it was too important to understand the full complexity of the data to just like faff around in code. So I think it just depends on the case, but that's a really great question because it happens a lot. You move on before you even really understand what you're working with.
Yeah, great. All right, then let's wrap up with Omer's fantastic question about the role that competition plays in iteration process. And he brings up the example of the 2020 general election. How much do newsrooms or journalists look, left and right to make decisions about what other organizations have been doing, are doing, or expected to be doing? And how did you know that your solution was significantly better than the dreaded election needle?
Oh, the needle. I mean, I'm surprised you didn't point out that The Economist came out with a forecast that looked a lot like a forecast looks, I'll just say. Yeah, the needle. The needle is a specific case, so I'm not going to go too super into that, but definitely has some supporters and haters at FiveThirtyEight. Definitely people who are like, everyone should just build this, which, yeah, I fall on a certain side. Again, so there's, I think, and one of the nice things about working at FiveThirtyEight has been we are already at a certain level. People already come to us because they want to, right? And I think they come to us because we try to contextualize the numbers. I don't think the needle, for example, does a really good job of that. And that's what I was pointing out when I said, like, people come to the forecast to be like, who's going to win? People stay on the forecast because they want to understand what the distribution of possibilities are. How has a certain state switched in their leaning over time, how like they want to know more about that. They want to spend time on the page, I think, as well, or a lot of our readers do. So I think we, again, maybe this is, I'm answering it from a case of luxury here, but we really, that was the goal of our forecast this time. And also it's our goal of us every time we were doing the forecast before other people were doing a forecast. So I think we come from, look, you're already here, you know why you're at 538, but we also had the goal of explaining the forecast better, providing more contextual information, and trying to gain a new audience. And I think that was critical in being like, cool, The Economist put out really beautiful charts, a couple of different things that we didn't have. But again, the way they're doing it is not exactly our approach. And 538 and New York Times with a needle, that was like a page where a needle sits on it and nothing else, right? So I think those are three different experiences of similar data. And it really is about how you're approaching it, what the goal, what the mission of that piece is. And I think typically that's how we try to differentiate ourselves from competition. And with that, we're gonna lose readers who want to see something else, but we're gonna keep the readers who want that type of content. And again, I know that's from a luxurious position, and it said it was quite different in the sense that broader user base, everyone from 15 to age 85, different considerations when you're saying, how do we differentiate ourselves from the Tagesanzeiger or whatever other Republik or something else. I think that's just a different context.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you again for your presentation. Thank you for talking us through the answers to the questions. Last question is, where can people follow your work? Quick plug.
Yeah, I'll write it in the chat. Follow me for the next few weeks, 538, but after that, follow me to wherever I go then, at Wiederkehr, so that's WIEDRKEHRA. DM me. I'm seeing all these names of people who I haven't talked to in so long in the chat. I missed. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Florian. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Please reach out to me. I'm also planning to do some like 30-minute free-for-all, schedule yourself in my time just to have a tea with me while I'm not working at 538 anymore. So look out for that. I would love to just like throw around ideas and just talk about the industry. So.
All right, fantastic. So we're gonna leave it with this for today. From my side, thank you again, Anna, for accepting the invitation to present today and for your presentation today. Thank you, everybody in the chat, everybody who participated and joined in. If you have any questions or concerns about the meetup itself, if you have ideas for future speakers or topics, please get in touch with us over meetup.com. It's probably the easiest place. You can always also catch us on Twitter, Instagram, or send us an email. We're going to have our March meetup towards the end of March. And if we manage to find the appointment, then we're going to have Dr. Matthias Stahl on. He will talk about data visualizations with Svelte. Svelte is a user interface framework that helps you build web applications, and it has been enjoying increased attention in the last 1 or 2 years for using it with, especially for data visualizations. So going to be really excited to have him on. Watch out for the event on meetup.com, and we share it obviously on our social media channels. In the meantime, thank you everybody for being part of this. Anna, thanks again for being here today, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye all.